Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike .shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Roddy Fry contacted me and asked if I had ever heard of an explorer who said he had found a tree that grew sheep. I had not, so I had to look into this story. One thing led to another, and I found a whole lot of weird stories about plants that, if they do exist, we should track them down and exterminate them. Or plant them around the capitals in big cities. Keep those politicians under control. First off, this Sunday, me and my wife were in the kitchen doing food things, either cooking or cleaning up. The phone rang. As soon as the answering machine picked up, the line went dead, and then the phone immediately rang again. The answering machine is in my office. The answering machine picked up on the second ring, and a message was left. I could hear something, but I was focused on what my wife was saying and not what the phone was saying. I figured it was just somebody trying to sell me an extended warranty on my vehicle. Monday, I went to my office to work on the show, and I thought I'd listen to the message before I erased it. Well, I didn't erase it. I re-recorded it. Here is what was on my phone answering machine.
You have one old message. Sunday, 9:02 p.m. End of messages.
Don't call them conspiracy theories. Call them spoiler alerts. If you listen to the earlier shows back before the entire world went crazy, you'll know I'm into conspiracies. Most of my friends who do podcasts stay away from conspiracies because they don't want to be accused of offending someone and wind up being canceled by all the podcast platforms. The list of things you can't talk about, despite the First Amendment, is horrifyingly long. And it's growing every day. Also, those involved in creating the conspiracies are quick to squash anyone who just might be onto them. Back in 1977, a movie came out called Telephone. It starred Charles Bronson and Donald Pleasance, the guy from Halloween, the first one. A bunch of Soviet sleeper agents were being put into action by a phone call and a certain phrase. When that music started, to me it sounded kind of like a trigger. It also sounds like it's from a long time ago. Maybe someone somewhere out there will hear it and go do something. Maybe I shouldn't have played it on the show. It also reminded me of those number stations that Clyde Lewis talks about. The caller ID said Odessa, Texas, both times. If you've heard this call or you know what it is, drop me an email at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Could it be just some kind of a weird computer thing? I don't know. It doesn't sound like a computer playing the music, but hey, what do I know? You can do just about anything today with a computer. According to the 19th century naturalist Henry Lee, who penned a 60-page document on a history of the vegetable lamb in Europe, this legend met with an almost universal acceptance from the 13th to the 17th centuries. His source was the Middle Ages' most famous traveler, Sir John Mandeville, whose fantastic accounts of his travels abroad in the 1300s led to a number of cryptid plants becoming well known throughout Europe. Mandeville wrote in Middle English, which is almost another language. It has to be translated into English to be understood. And not wanting to abuse my listeners, I'll try and summarize what he had to say. It still might sound weird. In Tartary, now part of Russia and Mongolia, there grows a plant that produces gourds, and from these issue forth tiny lambs which men can eat. Mandeville said they are quite delicious. The plants became known as vegetable lambs. And naturally, the boys in the white lab coats came out saying that Mandeville was a liar. And not just mistaken, but lying. It's easy to pick on the dead as long as they're not zombies or vampires. Two variations of the Baramets story circulated in Middle Ages. The Baramets is a strange plant-like monster that arises spontaneously from a normal fruit tree, as some say as a result of ancient druidic magic or fey meddling. A fruit tree bearing a Baramets grows an unusually large fruit that soon drops from the tree and bursts open to reveal a goat-like creature. The plant Mandeville wrote of bore many different pods which burst open to reveal tiny lambs. Some say these lambs grew to full-size sheep, while others said they remained tiny. The second version was that the tree had just one lamb that grew from the very top. When hungry, the tree would bend down, allowing the lamb to graze on whatever was close. The plant was reliant on vegetation growing close enough to keep it alive. To add to the Europeans' confusion, the folks in China began creating small lambs using bits and pieces of plants. Sailors and travelers would return home with these manufactured vegetable lambs. The Dark Ages were called this because folks were kind of uneducated. Not everybody, but most everyone, knew how to do their job, and that was it. Clothing was limited to what you could find in the area. Wool, leather, fur, some linen, which is made from plants. Anything really nice was imported and cost a ton, so only the really rich folks had cotton or silk. The folks living in the countryside had no idea how cotton was produced, so when they heard about a cotton plant, they thought it was wool growing from the ground. Keep in mind, these were the same folks who thought that water would kill you, so they drank beer all day. Also, they didn't bathe, so talk about a stinky place. Explorers would head out and visit some far-flung region of the planet. Once they got back, they also brought back bizarre stories of things they had heard about. Some even said they saw these weird plants and animals. While away in foreign countries, they had to rely on interpreters to converse with the locals. Some of these locals saw these visitors as being an easy mark to sell them things that might not have been real. Then again, they could have had some real plants that once back in Europe wound up in the clutches of the folks running things. Each traveler considered it their duty to return with some unimaginable and bizarre thing to show off to the folks back home. P.T. Barnum wasn't the first person to show two animals together and call it something new. There were some highly creative people living in the Far East that could stick the head of an animal on a plant and call it a vegetable lamb. Also, we have the problem with translation. A case in point, the unicorn. Everyone pictures a unicorn as being a horse with one spiral horn in the center of their head. The legend first came from India. The creature they described had short, stubby legs, a thick skin that was gray, and the horn was on its nose and it curved upwards. This sounds more like a rhinoceros. As far as that spiral horn, that was actually the tusk from a narwhal. What was it that was being described to Manville that led to his thinking there was a tree that grew sheep? Have you ever seen a tree full of goats? Some goats like to climb trees, and sometimes there are so many you might just think it's a goat tree. Grown almost exclusively in the South Valley in southwest Morocco, the argania tree produces an annual fruit crop that the goats really like. And to get to the fruit, these goats will climb up into the branches to pick the fruit. If a traveler from Europe were to see a tree full of goats, what was he going to tell the folks back home? No kidding, there's a tree full of goats in northern Africa. The vegetable lamb and the plant it was attracted to would die if the lamb ate all the grass within its reach, after which it would starve to death. Once the lamb was dead, its wool was used and its flesh consumed, with the meat said to be quite tasty. The blood tasted like honey. During the Renaissance, folks began using their brains a bit more. As word of bizarre plants, animals, and people were being told by travelers, scientists began searching out these mysteries to try to determine just what was out there. The predecessors to the boys in the white lab coats would actually go looking with open minds, and not just making declarations from back home. These traveling scientists wrote about what they encountered in distant lands like China and India. There grows there a fruit of such proportion that when it's ripe, men open it and find inside an animal of flesh, blood, and bone, like a tiny lamb with wool. And the people of that land eat the animal and the fruit as well. It is a great marvel. The Lamb of Tartary was mentioned in other reports from explorers to the region and began to interest naturalists who were excited about this strange plant's existence. In the 16th century, a well-respected scholar and diplomat named Baron Sigmund von Herberstein included a report of the lambs within his influential 1549 work on the court of Muscovia in Russia, called Notes on Muscovite Affairs. Karl Schuker wrote of this account in his book A Manifestation of Monsters, in which he told of Baron's report. The Baron's account stated that the vegetable lamb possessed not only a normal lamb's head with eyes and ears, but also a normal lamb's woolly fleece. Its tiny limbs even sported hooves, though these were exceedingly delicate, as they were apparently composed merely of compressed hair, not the hard horny substance of real lamb's hooves. The lamb was permanently attached to a long stem, comparable to an umbilical cord, which grew vertically to a height of about 2.5 feet, thus suspending the lamb high above the ground. But it could use its weight to bend the stem downwards, thereby enabling it to stand and walk upon the ground, and to graze upon any grass or foliage that was within reach. There was much excitement at the time that this could be an anomaly of nature that fused the worlds of plants and animals into one, and the lamb became a regular inclusion in most bestiaries where it was considered to be a very real thing indeed. For centuries, expeditions were sent to look for specimens of this exclusive plant. Some explorers visiting the region where the lambs were said to lurk told tales of the wool being used for clothing, and they said that whole vegetable lamb skins could sometimes be bought. On occasion, some of these skins even found their way to European countries, such as a coat lined with vegetable lamb skin that came into the possession of Sir Richard Leah, who was the English ambassador to the court of the Russian Tsar Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. The coat was donated to the Oxford Bodleian Library in 1609, along with other samples of strange plants and animals kept by Leah, but it was more or less stored away, or forgotten, and it has been lost to time. This makes me wonder how many cryptid items are hidden away in some museum. The people in charge don't want us to know certain things, so they just squirrel them away and say there's no such thing. Could there possibly be an entire Sasquatch hidden away in the back rooms of the Smithsonian, as the guys in the front office all declare that Bigfoot isn't real? Even more impressive still was the preserved specimen of one of the vegetable lambs, which was purchased from an Indian merchant by a Mr. Buckley, after which it went on display at the Royal Society of London in 1698. The specimen was about a foot long, and it was covered in a dark yellow fleece. The Royal Society would put on display another specimen of the vegetable lamb in 1725, which had been acquired from Russia by a German doctor named Dr. Johann P. Bryan. Unfortunately, just as with the skin-lined coat, these specimens have since been lost or hidden away. In more modern times, it has been speculated that the tail of the Lamb of Tartary may have been from a misidentification of a plant now known as the woolly fern, which has a fluffy rhizome, or modified subterranean stem of the plant that can resemble a lamb if its leaves are removed and it's turned upside down. Two surviving specimens of vegetable lambs, one at the Garden Museum in London and another in London's Natural History Museum, are thought to be fakes, cleverly crafted out of woolly fern, although they have not been on public display and they've not been properly examined since they're considered to be too old and frail. How do they know they're not real if they don't examine them? Once again, we've got these people declaring science instead of actually doing science. Well, the woolly fern idea is certainly interesting. It's not the explanation that really tells us what they've got. While the idea of such a botanical oddity actually existing may seem preposterous, you have to ask yourself just what could have started such amazing tales and if there is any real plant to it. The whole idea of an animal being like a plant is just too hard to believe. It's right up there with having plants that eat meat. Yes, the Venus flytrap is real. It eats small insects, and there are at least 12 different plants out there that sustain themselves by eating insects and small animals. How do we know what might be found in some far-off distant land? I forgot to turn the volume down on my other computer. It makes all kinds of weird noises, and I don't know why. I've disabled everything possible, and it still makes weird noises. I have to turn the speaker on if I want to listen to music while I'm working in the office, so oops. The very fact that scientists had samples of the vegetable lamb plant sent back to be studied, and those studying it said they didn't know what it was, led me to believe there are some bizarre plants hidden away in the back rooms and private gardens of those who don't want us to know certain things. With an ancient work, Inventorum Natura, the Expeditional Journal of Pliny the Elder is an account of some very strange plants. The volume catalogues natural wonders that the great Roman naturalist encountered during a 3-year journey he took around the known world of the time, and within its pages is a description of a miraculous type of grass native to mainland Asia, which had flowers that would morph into tiny, colorful birds that would fly off when ripe. These birds were said to look mostly like the real thing and could act independently. Yet, when dissected, they showed that they were still anatomically botanical in nature. The weird plants would also be mentioned in 1667 work by Anthecesis Kircher, called China Illustra, where it was described as, in Sichuan province there is said to be a little bird which is born from the flower called tunchan, and so the Chinese call it tunchan feng. The Chinese say that this measures its life by the life of the flower, and that flower and bird die at the same time. The bird has a variety of colors. When flying and beating its wings, the bird looks like a beautiful flower flying across the heavens. A cryptozoologist, Carl Schuker, has written of these anomalous flowers, and he theorizes that this could have been a legend born from the misconception that small nectar-loving birds, such as hummingbirds or sunbirds, that were hovering above the plants and drinking from them, may have been mistaken for the flower giving birth to the birds. As Schuker said, it is possible that the latter is a species of sunbird, native to Africa, Asia, and Australia. Sunbirds are small, extremely brightly colored, and mirror ecologically, but not toxicologically, to the New World hummingbirds. Feeding primarily on nectar, they spend much of their time in such close proximity to flowers that this intimate association may well have inspired an erroneous belief that these diminutive birds were actually being engendered by the flowers. One type of legendary grass common in Irish lore is called fair gortach, or hungry grass. Often said to be cursed or under the influence of some sort of entity such as fairies, hungry grass was said to cause an insatiable hunger, possibly even starvation, and profound weakness in anyone who walked across it, with the only way to pass safely being to carry food with you. In some versions of the tale, this grass is somewhat snake-like and will actively wrap itself around unwary passers-by. The grass was also said to corrupt and eat other crops, and was so persistent in lore that it was blamed for the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. In some areas, such as a place called Hungry Hill, the grass was supposedly so plentiful that it was considered to be a death sentence to venture there, with those who entered the area never coming back. The man-eating lotus of Nubia was an enormous lotus tree known to lure in prey with sweet succulent fruit, only to lash out, kill, and consume any person unwary enough to get too close. In an 1881 travelogue called Under the Punkah, explorer Phil Robinson told of how one of these man-eating plants had attacked his uncle. The uncle was reported as having emptied his firearm into the bloodthirsty tree, after which he had hacked away at it with a knife as it grabbed and stabbed at him with vines and branches. He was finally able to barely escape with his life, but one of his native guides had not been quite so lucky. Robinson describes the man-eating lotus as this awful plant that rears its splendid death shade in the central solitude of a Nubian fern forest, sickens by its unwholesome humors, that's its fluids, all vegetation from its immediate vicinity, and feeds upon the wild beasts that, in the terror of the chase or the heat of noon, seek the thick shelter of its boughs, upon the birds that, flighting across the open space, come within the charmed circle of its power, or innocently refresh themselves from the cups of its great waxen flowers. Upon even man himself, when an infrequent prey, the savage seeks its asylum in the storm, or turns from the harsh foot-wounding sword-grass of the glade to pluck the wondrous fruit that hung plump down among the wondrous foliage. And such fruit, glorious golden ovals, great honey drops, swelled by their own weight into pear-shaped translucence. The foliage glistens with a strange dew that all day long drips on the ground below, nurturing a rank growth of grass which shoots up in places so high that their spikes of fierce blood-fed green show far up among the deep-tinted foliage of the terrible tree, and like a jealous bodyguard keep concealed the fearful secret of the carnal house within, and draw round the black roots of the murderous plant a decent screen of living green. Good Lord, they talked funny back then. I just hope that this kind of speech doesn't come back into vogue. There are some things we just don't need to redo. Fashion, for one. I see people wearing bell-bottoms and platform shoes again. Good Lord, are we back in the 80s? I wonder if the pillbox hat with the veil will ever come back into fashion, or how about those funny little white gloves women used to wear? The man-eating lotus might be the man-eating tree of Nubia, which was a cryptid carnivorous plant reported from the Sudan. The name might have gotten mixed up, or this might be two distinct plants. His uncle described it as a plant which grows golden pear-shaped fruit and secretes a strange dew which causes tall grass to grow around it. It ate animals which sought shelter from the heat, predators, or storms, and came to eat its fruit or drink from the water that was pooled in its flowers. Robinson recounts his uncle's stories as best he could. One day, leaving my mule with two men who were pitching my tent for the night, I went on with my gun, the boy accompanying me, towards a fern forest which I saw in the near distance. As I approached it, I found the forest was cut in two by a wide glade, and seeing a small herd of common antelope, an excellent beast in the pot, browsing their way along the shaded side, I crept after them. Although ignorant of the real danger, the herd was suspicious and slowly trotted along before me, enticing me for a mile or more along the verge of the fern growth. Turning a corner, I suddenly became aware of a solitary tree growing in the middle of the glade. One tree all alone. It struck me at once that I had never seen a tree exactly like it before, but, being intent on venison for my dinner, I looked at it only long enough to satisfy my first surprise at seeing a single plant of such rich growth flourishing luxuriantly in a spot where only the harsh fern canes seemed to thrive. The deer, meanwhile, were midway between me and the tree, and, looking at them, I saw they were going to cross the glade. Exactly opposite them was an opening in the forest, in which I should certainly have lost my dinner, so I fired into the middle of the family as they were filing before me. I hit a young fawn, and the rest of the herd wheeled around in their sudden terror, made off in the direction of the tree, leaving the fawn struggling on the ground. Otana, the boy, ran forward at my order to secure it, but the little creature, seeing him coming, attempted to follow its comrades, and at a fair pace held on their course. The herd had meanwhile reached the tree, but suddenly, instead of passing under it, they swerved in their career and swept round it at some yards' distance. Man, they talked funny back then. On a sudden, I saw, or I thought I saw, the tree violently agitated, and while the ferns all around were standing motionless in the dead evening air, its boughs were swayed by some sudden gust towards the herd, and swept in the force of their impulse almost to the ground. I drew my hand across my eyes, closed them for a moment, and looked again. The tree was as motionless as myself. Towards it, and now close to it, the boy was running in excited pursuit of the fawn. He stretched out his hands to catch it. It bounded from his eager grasp. Again he reached forward, and again it escaped him. There was another rush forward, and the next instant the boy and the deer were beneath the tree. And now there was no mistaking what I saw. The tree was convulsed with motion and leaned forward, swept its thick foliage boughs to the ground, and enveloped from my sight the pursuer and the pursued. I was within 100 yards, and the cry of Otona from the midst of the tree came to me in all the clearness of its agony. There was then one stifled, strangled scream, and except for the agitation of the leaves where they had closed upon the boy, there was not a sign of life. I called out, "Otona!" No answer came. I tried to call out again, but my utterances was like that of some wild beast, smitten at once with sudden terror and its death wound. I stood there, changed from all semblance of a human being. Not all the terror of earth together could have made me take my eyes from the awful plant, or my foot off the ground. I must have stood thus for at least an hour, for the shadow had crept out from the forest across the glade before that hideous paroxysm of fear left me. My first impulse, then, was to creep stealthily away, lest the tree should perceive me, but my returning senses bade me approach it. The boy might have fallen into the lair of some beast or of prey, or perhaps the terrible life in the tree was that of some great serpent among its branches. Preparing to defend myself, I approached the silent tree, the harsh grasp crisping beneath my feet with a strange loudness, the cicadas in the forest shrilling till the air seemed throbbing around me with waves of sound. Man, what a way to talk. The terrible truth was soon before me in its awful novelty. The vegetable first discovered my presence at about 50 yards distance. I then became aware of the stealthy motion among the thick-lipped leaves, reminding me of some wild beast slowly gathering itself up for a long sleep, a vast coil of snakes in restless motion. Have you ever seen bees hanging from a bough, a great cluster of bodies? Bees clinging to bees, and by striking the bough or agitating the air, caused the mass of life to begin sulkily to disintegrate, each insect asserting its individual right to move. And do you remember how, without one bee leaving the pensile cluster, the whole became gradually instinct with sullen life and horrid with a multitudinous motion? Yep, definitely hard to read. I read Jules Verne's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea a while ago, the original version, and it is very difficult to read. No, not the French version, the English version, but they talk like that back then, and it will make your brain hurt. I came within 20 yards of it. The tree was quivering through every branch, muttering for blood and helpless with rooted feet, yearning with every branch towards me. It was that terror of the deep sea which the men of the northern fjord dread, and which, anchored upon some sunken rock, stretches its vine space into longing arms, pellucid as the sea itself, and as relentless, maimed polypheme groping for its victims. Each separate leaf was agitated and hungry. Like hands, they fumbled together, their fleshy palms curving upon themselves and again unfolding and closing on each other and falling apart again, thick, helpless. Fingerless hands, rather lips or tongues than hands, dimpled closely with little cup-like hollows. I approached nearer and nearer, step by step, till I saw that these soft horrors were all of them in motion, opening and closing incessancy. I was now within 10 yards of the furthest reaching bough. Every part of it was hysterical with excitement. The agitation of its members was awful, sickening, yet fascinating. In an ecstasy of eagerness for the food so near them, the leaves turned upon each other. A two meeting would suck together face to face with a force that compressed their joint thickness to a half, thinning the two leaves into one. Now grappling in a volute like a double shell. Within, like some green worm, or at last faint with the violence of the paroxysm, would slowly separate, falling apart as leeches, gorged dropping off of a limb. A sticky dew glistened in the dimples, welling over and trickling down the leaf. The sound of it dripping from leaf to leaf made it seem as if the tree was muttering to itself. The beautiful golden fruit, as they swung here and there, were clutched now by one leaf and now by another, held for a moment close enfolded from the sight, and then as suddenly released. Here a large leaf, vampire-like, had sucked out the juices of the smaller one. It hung limp and bloodless like a carcass of which the weasel had grown tired. I watched the terrible struggle till my startled eyes, strained by intense attention, refused their office, and I can hardly say what I saw. But the tree before me seemed to have become a live beast. Above me I felt conscious as a great limb, and each of its 1,000 clammy hands reached downwards towards me, fumbling. It strained, shivered, rocked, and heaved. It flung itself about in despair. The boughs, tantalized to madness with the presence of flesh, were tossed to this side and that, in an agony of frantic desire. The leaves were wrung together as the hands of one driven to madness by sudden misery. I felt the vile dew spurting from the tense vines fall upon me. My clothes began to give out a strange odor. The ground I stood on glistened with animal juice. Was I bewildered by terror? Had my senses abandoned me in my need? I know not, but the tree seemed to me to be alive. Leaning over towards me, it seemed to be pulling up its roots from the softened ground and to be moving towards me. A mountainous monster with a myriad lips mumbling together for my life was upon me. Like one who desperately defends himself from imminent death, I made an effort for life and fired my gun at the approaching terror. To my dizzied senses, the sound seemed far off, but the shock of the recoil partially recalled me to myself, and I started back. I reloaded. The shot had torn away into the soft body of the great thing. The trunk, as it received the wound, shuddered, and the whole tree was struck with a sudden quiver. A fruit fell down, slipping from the leaves, now rigid with swollen veins, as from a carven foliage. Then I saw a large arm slowly drop, and without a sound it was severed from the juice-fattened bowl and sank down softly, noiselessly, through the glistening leaves. I fired again, and another vile fragment was powerlessly dead. At each discharge, the terrible vegetable yielded a life. A piecemeal I attacked it, killing here a leaf and there a branch. My fury increased with the slaughter till, when my ammunition was exhausted, the splendid giant was left a wreck, as if some hurricane had torn through it. On the ground lay heaped together the fragments, struggling, rising and falling, gasping. Over them drooped a dying languor, a few stricken boughs, while upright in the midst stood, dripping at every joint, the glistening trunk. My continued firing had brought up one of my men on my mule. He dared not come near me, thinking me mad. I had now drawn my hunting knife, and with this was fighting with the leaves. Yes, but each leaf was instinct with a horrid life, and more than once I felt my hand entangled for a moment and seized as if by sharp lips. Ignorant of the presence of my companion, I made a rush forward over the fallen foliage, and with a last paroxysm of frenzy drove my knife up to the handle in the soft bowl, and, slipping on the fast congealing sap, fell exhausted and unconscious among the still panting leaves. What a way to speak. My companion carried me back to camp, and after vainly searching for Otona, awaited my return to consciousness. 2 or 3 hours elapsed before I could speak, and several days before I could approach the terrible thing. My men would not go near it. It was quite dead, for as we came upon the great-billed bird with gaudy plumage that had been securely feasting on the decaying fruit, flew up from the wreck. We removed the rotting foliage, and there among the dead leaves, still limp with juice and piled around the roots, were found the ghastly relics of many former meals. In its last nourishment, the corpse of Otona. To have removed the leaves would have taken too long, so we buried the body as it was, with 100 vampire leaves still clinging to it. I'm glad that's over. Either the guy was drinking something stronger than would have been safe in the jungle, or he had a run-in with some unknown plant that ate people and animals. Could this just be a tall tale told to entertain his family? Maybe. Or it just might have happened. He probably enhanced the story over the years, but there has to be some basis of truth for the story. I don't think most people were quite that creative that they could just wham together something like that just out of thin air. Explorers were not writers, and writers were not explorers. From the swamps of Nicaragua comes the rather bizarre account of the elusive and terrifying vampire vine. The vine is referred to by the natives as the devil's snare and is described as being rather like an octopus in appearance. The plant was described by one naturalist by the name of Mr. Dunstan, who came face to face with its horrifying nature while spending 2 years studying the plants and animals of the region. In the account, Dunstan said he came across the plant while in a swamp region near Lake Nicaragua. Dunstan, who was collecting plants and insect specimens in the area, suddenly heard his dog let out a high-pitched whine of terror, pain, or both. Dunstan hurried to the source of the cries, and he found his dog enveloped by a network of rope-like roots and fibers. These fibers were a dark, nearly black hue, and were covered with thick gum that seemed to exude from some sort of pores. The gum was extremely adhesive and had a foul animal odor. The ensnared dog struggled with its fibrous network and was wailing as if in great deal of pain. Once the startled Dunstan was able to recover from this gruesome sight, he tried desperately to cut the dog free with his knife, but he found the vines to be surprisingly difficult to cut, and to his horror found that the plant's rope-like tendrils were actively wrapping and curling themselves around his hands like sinuous fingers. Dunstan was able to extricate the animal only after an enormous amount of effort, and he noticed that the grasping vines had left the skin of his hands red and blistered. He also noticed, to his amazement, that the dog was blood-stained and covered in spots that seemed puckered as if they'd been sucked. The dog, though still alive, was extremely disoriented and had difficulty walking. The naturalist told the natives of his encounter, and they explained that the vine was well known and feared in the area, warning him to stay well away from it. Undaunted, Dunstan tried to collect more information on the bizarre vine, but found it to be very difficult to approach or handle. Through his observations, he deduced where the plant's remarkable suction abilities derived from and how it fed. He said, "The plant's power of suction is contained within a number of infinitesimal mouths or little suckers, which ordinarily close, open for the reception of food. If the substance is animal, the blood is drawn off and the carcass or refuse then dropped. A lump of raw meat being thrown to it, in a short space of 5 minutes the blood will be thoroughly drunk off and the mass thrown aside. Its voracity is almost beyond belief." Dunstan also described how the plant was extremely hard to get off once it latched on, and could only be pulled away with a great deal of effort and possible loss of skin. He eventually gave up his studies on the vampire vine, and very little else is known about it. Central America is home to various man-eating trees, known as the Yate Veo tree. The tree is said to have long spikes which it uses to impale its victims, and whereupon it absorbs the victim's blood. The spikes or spines have dagger-like thorns around their edges and hang down to the ground, where they lay hidden and still until prey comes along. When an unsuspecting victim steps among these barbed shoots, they spring to life, energetically impaling the victim. The victim's blood is then drunk through the trunk of the tree. Other carnivorous plants have been reported from Mexico. In the Sierra Madre area, a tree was reported that had branches with a slimy, snake-like appearance. One witness described seeing a bird land on one of these unusual branches and promptly be pulled down into the mass of the other branches. The base of the tree was said to be littered with the bones and feathers of other unfortunate birds. When the branches were touched by one witness, they were found to snap down on the hand with enough force to tear skin. Another account from Mexico was described by explorer Baron Kuhn de Porc in the Chiapas region of southern Mexico. While trekking through the jungle, he came across a giant plant which had impaled a bird upon its thorn-covered leaves. A native guide referred to the plant as the Planta Vampira, vampire plant. From Brazil came an account of what is called the Brazilian devil tree, which is reportedly found in the Mato Grosso region. The tree is said to hide its branches in the leaves and the undergrowth of the forest floor, or sometimes even underground. When a victim passes, the branches wrap around him or her and slowly constrict the victim to death. It is said to be the size of a willow tree, but it hides its branches deep in the earth or in the forest undergrowth, allowing it to ambush any prey which moves over its branches. 1932, Captain Thomas W. H. Sarl of Middlesex traveled to the Amazon with the intention of bringing back a live specimen of one of these trees, but he was unable to. Another plant reportedly found in the very same region is known as to have sweet-tasting berries in order to lure prey, mostly birds. When a bird tries to eat the berries, branches snap around the unsuspecting prey and crush it against the trunk, after which the blood is sucked from the body at the plant's leisure, and then the body is discarded. Also from Brazil, near the border with Guyana, comes the story of the monkey trap tree, which is described by the explorer Mariano de Silva. The plant's preferred prey was said to be monkeys that were attracted by an irresistible scent exuded by the tree. The tree then enveloped the monkeys with large leaves and digested the body over a period of several days, after which the bones were dropped to the forest floor. These could be the same tree consuming whatever happened to come close enough to eat. In Argentina and Bolivia, another plant can be found in the Chaco forest region. In this case, massive, beautiful flowers are said to hang down from the canopy, which exude a powerful sleeping agent. A prey is paralyzed by this poisonous perfume and subsequently drained of blood via suckers contained within the flowers themselves. The plant is said to feed on all manner of large animals and even human beings. A European explorer related his sighting. Suddenly I saw Domingo, the leader of the guides, standing before an enormous plant and making gestures for me to go to him. I wondered what could be the matter. I soon saw the plant had just captured a bird. The poor creature had been alighted on one of the leaves, which had promptly closed. Its thorns penetrated the body of the little victim, which endeavored vainly to escape, screaming meanwhile in agony and terror. "A Planta Vampira," explained Domingo, a cruel smile spreading over his face. Involuntarily I shuddered. The forest was casting its evil spell upon me. Same name, different area. The vampire plant, found in Mexico and apparently in Brazil as well. Carl Schuker finds the existence of vampire plants plausible and suggests that it may be synonymous with Mexican snake tree, the Nicaraguan dog-devouring tree, and the Brazilian bird-eating tree. Madagascar is home to at least two distinct types of mysterious carnivorous flora. Perhaps the most well-known comes from an old account brought back from the deepest jungles by the German explorer Karl Leech in 1878. The account describes in horrific detail the sacrifice of a village woman of the Makudo tribe to a giant flesh-eating tree. This was long before the movie King Kong came out. In a letter published in South Australian Register in 1881, Leech described the unsettling scene that unfolded before him and his cohort, a man known as Hendrick. Leech writes, "The slender, delicate palpi, with the fury of a starved serpent, quivered a moment over her head, Then, as if instinct with demonic intelligence, fastened upon her in sudden coils round and round her neck and arms, while her awful screams and yet more awful laughter rose wildly, to be instantly strangled down again into a gurgling moan. The tendrils, one after another, like great green serpents, with brutal energy and infernal rapidity, rose, retracted themselves, and wrapped her about in fold after fold, ever tightening with cruel swiftness and savage tenacity of an anaconda fastening upon their prey. The tree itself was described as being about 8 feet in height and having an appearance reminiscent of a pineapple, with 8 long pointy leaves that hung down from its top to the ground. The trunk of the tree was topped with a sort of a receptacle that contained a thick liquid said to have soporific inducing or tendency to induce sleep, quality that drugged potential prey and was believed to be highly addictive. Surrounding this receptacle were long hairy tendrils with 6 white pulpi resembling tentacles. The tree possessed white translucent leaves with that reminded Leach of a quivering mouth part of an insect. The graphic account has inspired several expeditions to Madagascar in search of the tree. One such expedition was undertaken by Chas Salmon Osborne, the governor of Michigan from 1911 to 1913, who went to the jungle of Madagascar to search for the man-eating tree. Although he was unsuccessful in his efforts to locate it, he did find both native and Western missionaries who said they had seen the tree and what they could do. Another expedition was launched in 1998, this time by Czech explorer Ivan Mackerel. This expedition could not locate the elusive tree either, but during his travels, Mackerel learned of yet another carnivorous tree on the island referred to as Kumanga Killer Tree. Natives claimed that this particular tree was found on only one part of the island and was said to have flowers that exuded an extremely poisonous gas. The natives claimed to know where such a tree was and guided Mackerel to its location. During the trek, the expedition members were so concerned about the poisonous nature of the plant they had to wear gas masks. When they arrived at the Kumanga Killer Tree, they found no gas-spewing flowers, but they did find several animal skeletons under the tree. The lack of flowers, the native explained, was due to the tree not being in bloom. Mackerel also uncovered a story of a former British Army officer who had taken photographs of a tree on the island that had various animal skeletons strewn about its base. Whether this particular tree was either one of the aforementioned carnivorous trees or something new is uncertain. While exploring in Mindanao region of Philippines, a planter from Mississippi reportedly came across a 35-foot tall tree with dark gray color that was 80 to 100 feet in diameter, surrounded by bones and emitting a foul-smelling odor like carrion. He noticed a human skull laying near the tree and went to investigate, but his guide stopped him, pointing at the tree in panic. That was when the horrified planter realized that the tree was reaching for him. The account appears titled as Escape from the Embrace of the Man-Eating Tree in the American Weekly, January 4th, 1925. The whole thing had changed shape and was horribly alive and alert. The dull, heavy leaves had sprung from their compact formation, were coming at him from all directions, advancing on the ends of long vine-like stems which stretched across like the necks of innumerable geese, and now that the old man had stopped his screaming, the air was filled with hissing sounds. The leaves did not move straight at their target, but with a graceful side-to-side sway like a cobra about to attack. From the far side, the distant leaves were peeping and swaying on their journey around the trunk, and even the treetop was bending down to join in the attack. The bending of the trunk was spasmodic and accompanied by sharp cracks. The effect of this advancing and swaying mass of green objects was hypnotic, like the charming movement of a snake. Bryant could not move, though the nearest leaf was within an inch of his face. He could see that it was armed with sharp spines on which a liquid was forming. He saw the heavy leaf curve like a green mittened hand as it brushed his eyebrow. In passing, he got a smell of it, the same animal smell that hung in the surrounding air. Another instant and the thing would have had him in its sticky, prickly grasp, but either his weakness or the guide's strength threw them both on their backs. The charm was broken. They crawled out of the circle of death and lay panting in the grass, while the malignant plant cracked and hissed, yearning and stretching and thrashing to get to them. A report comes from Padram, India, where in 2007 a farmer's cow was attacked by a carnivorous plant. October 18, 2007, a villager, Anand Gowda, took his cow herd to graze in the forest near the village, when one of the cows was suddenly grabbed by branches and unbelievably pulled from the ground. When Gowda shouted for help, other villagers converged on the scene, armed with knives and axes, and proceeded to hack at the tree until it let go of the cow. The carnivorous tree is known to locals and is called the Pili Mara, or the tiger tree. In the South Pacific, the island of El Banor is home to a man-eating flower known only as the death flower. The flower's existence is mostly known of through the 1581 account of explorer Captain Arkwright, who wrote of it in his journal. He described the plant as basically a huge, brightly colored flower with very large petals. The flower could release a soporific, sleep-inducing aroma, whereupon the victim would lie down upon one of the petals. Once this happened, the flower would close and digest its sleeping prey alive. Widely spoken of in Japan is the mystical type of tree known as the Jinmenju, the human-faced tree. Originally from China, where they were written of in a book called Sansei Zoe, a collection of pictures of heaven, earth, and man, as well as similar accounts from India and Persia, these particular trees were said to have pinkish fruit that looked like human heads, called Jinmenshu, or human-faced child, complete with eyes, ears, nose, and a mouth. The fruit was prone to fits of laughter. If one of the fruit were to laugh too hard, it would fall from the tree and wither away. They were also said to occasionally whisper or talk, which could be rather startling and unsettling to anyone passing by. Interestingly, the fruit was said to have a very pleasant, sour-sweet flavor if you had the nerve to actually bite into one. According to the Edo, a periodic encyclopedia, Wakan Sensei Zui, in Japanese these trees were found in the south, and there were some people who planted whole orchards of this bizarre tree with their laughing, smiling fruit. Another account from a doctor said he had actually been there, saying there was a whole mysterious island overgrown with the trees, somewhere out in the Indian Ocean. Another account also came from another doctor in Japan who wrote in his notes quite seriously of coming across a valley where he had found an odd, tropical-looking tree that like of which he had never seen before. As he passed it, he said he heard voices, and when he asked who was there, he heard the cryptic response, "We are we." He noticed the voices were coming from the unusual fruit that had human faces, looking like baby heads. It had eyes that looked right at him. When he asked if someone was behind the tree, the voices answered, "We are the tree," which startled the doctor so much that he stumbled and fell backwards. This sent the fruit into a fit of laughter, and some of them laughed so hard they fell from their branches, rolled along the ground while frowning and crying. Almost all the stories of the Jinmenju tree say that the fruit had faces on it. There are a few that say the tree itself had faces all up and down the trunk and along its branches. I would not mind seeing a baby-faced fruit tree. As far as man-eating plants, I'll pass. There are some things I don't want inside my head. If you enjoyed tonight's show, tell the world to listen in as well. Hey, sharing is caring, or something like that. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at strangethings@arkanasa.com. And if you're looking for a t-shirt or a coffee mug or something like that, you can find my stuff at tpublic.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.